Recently, I made a video that went over the results of the Fallout show survey. Among the questions asked was what the survey taker would have done if they were given complete creative control over the show with the benefit of hindsight, framed as if they went back in time. With this in mind, some kept the show mostly the same, while others went in the complete opposite direction. There's plenty of answers, and I went through a few of them, but with so many, there's a lot to share. Here are 3 more Fallout show ideas. Let's start off with MerryMarvelMarcher. Their show is set in New York and borrows significantly from the city's historical organized crime element, as well as the 1970s urban decay and power outage riots, its connection to Europe, and a history of hostile urban planning. The show hosts a Monster of the Week formula, one-off episodes of fun adventures, and ideally would be about 24 episodes, though they cut it down to about 9 here. Now, the primary factors are not involved much besides the BOS, and they're a threat everyone is preparing for. Marvel adds that New York is a wonderland of gothic mansions and Art Deco towers, sort of like Gotham and Batman, the animated series. Now, the main characters are a former tribal member, turned NCR Ranger, turned caravan guard, Foxfellow, though most just call him Ranger. Marvel chooses to keep the nuking of Shady Sands in their show, noting that Ranger doesn't know much about it yet, but when he inevitably learns, he doesn't take the news very well, and declares that the NCR lives on so long as his heart beats. There's a robo-brain named Kurtz with little memory of his past self, and speaks a lot of Yiddish, and a woman from Vault 52 dressed up as and calling herself Nuka Girl. The opening scene features a firefight between the caravan Ranger is guarding and Gunner Mercs. Naturally, the caravan is carrying something that could shift the region's power balance. To that aim, there's plenty of factions. The Outfit, a federation of large gangs but ran by the most powerful one in upstate New York, the Blue Bloods, and is generally the one people mean when they say the Outfit. They're descendants of high society, Wall Street types, and the Italian mob. They have 4 gangs under them, though Marvel only describes 3, such as the Dead Rats, which used to be an Irish gang, though the largest and most diverse one, and work in factories. The Queens, which runs prostitution out of Astoria, and a brothel named the Diamonds. They're the only ones utilizing a significant amount of power armor that was traded for their services. And finally, the Rocks, formerly the Bronx, artists, entertainers, musicians. With the destruction of Broadway, they became the hub of culture and theater in the area. They experiment with music and poetry, taking the shape of what we recognize as early classic hip-hop and rap. The rest of the gangs want to break away from the Blue Bloods after the death of longtime Don, Old Man Sal. So a power struggle is set on the horizon. As a response, the Blue Bloods, run by young Sal and a pre-war ghoul with an agenda, Abraham Dutch, have been locking down on their authority with force. There's good factions too. There's the Librarians, which are sort of like the followers of the apocalypse. Literacy, preservation of pre-war works, although they speak in a Shakespearean manner, use primarily melee weapons, and are led by a former warlord named Grognak, which Ranger found to do some research on the local gangs in episode 2. Then there's Bedlam, formerly Harlem, a lawless land filled with raider gangs. They're diverse in culture and morality, independent and gruff. They're sort of like the Great Khans. An episode would feature this group in the introduction of Nuka Girl. The mayor of Bedlam is found dead by an energy weapon, while the raiders chase Nuka Girl to avenge him. Ranger Kurtz track down the real killer. Once resolved, Nuka Girl joins the group and invites them to accompany her to her home of Vault 52. Which leads to episode 5, the culture of Vault 52 and its experiments. In short, Vault 52 is underneath Clyn, or rather Brooklyn, and was co-financed by Huber's Comics and Manticore Comics. They wanted to see if they could make real heroes through hagiography, the study of heroes and venerated figures. Of course, in this case, such heroes are the heroes of the comic companies. Controlled litters C that would eventually produce Vault Dwellers who identify as these heroes, wearing the costumes, speaking like them, etc. Thus, the Nuka Girl character. Episode 6 gives the group a mission from the Overseer. Above the vault, in the Manticore corporate offices, is an animatronic of the Gravekeeper, a horror host gravedigger. Top hat, tuxedo, slow but classy speech, rather intellectual. A mix of Lurch from the Addams Family and the Crypt Keeper. He wants the Gravekeeper so he can reclaim all the stories the animatronic tells, as the Gravekeeper comics were burned by a mother's group in the vault. The Robo-Brain has several flashbacks while in the office. Apparently he used to be the artist-writer, Jacob Kurtz. We learned that he was turned into a Robo-Brain after a bunch of legal issues involving a lack of contract. him and his fellow workers suing the company and eventually getting kidnapped and forced into the robot body. He freezes up at the time Mr. Henny's attacked the party. Eventually, he comes to and smashes the AI manager with glee. Eventually, they give the overseer the animatronic he wants. Episode 7 involves a big explanation about what's going on after a fight with Jack the Knife, a serial killer hired by Dutch to attack the party, why the caravan was attacked, and why the only thing Dutch wanted was a briefcase. The MacGuffin is the Empire State Building, built to be an airship port. The building would allow anyone with an airship to travel the vast Empire wastes. Great for trade and force projection. Naturally, the outfit has such. A luxury airship, the outfit has been retrofitting to be a war machine. The Empire State Building, full of offices for big businesses and government agencies, has been on tight lockdown with deadly robotic staff constantly surveying its empty halls. The suitcase in question is the presidential pass, the only thing that can disable defenses of the building. Once the pass is in the outfit's grasp, the plan begins. With the port and the airships, they can reshape New York and greet the Brotherhood with their fleet and negotiate better terms and hopefully secure their independence, or perhaps become a vassal of the BOS. Of course, Dutch has his own agenda, a bigger plan. In addition, this is the episode where Ranger learns that Shady Sands went boom. In a bar, he tells Nuka Girl that as far as wasteland governance go, the outfit isn't the worst he's seen. After a bit of talk, he agrees to stop the outfit. Episode 8 is split into 2 parts. Sal, Dutch, and the Atom Cat's Prez are going into the Empire State Building to take control. Nuka Girl and Ranger are going by the sewers to beat them there. Kirch was sent out to gather allies. Dutch reveals his ultimate plan at the Central Control. He wants to flatten Bedlam, removing their primary opposition, and allow for a dream of a gated community and a new capital. In his pre-war life, Dutch was a city planner and had unchecked power. New Hague was a masterwork and a dream never fulfilled. Anyway, Ranger and Nuka Girl fell, the tower is active, and the airship begins rising. Finally, episode 9 is about Kirch, the librarians, and the Vault 52 dwellers, fighting the Blue Buds in the street. Ranger and Nuka Girl fight henchmen in the tower. Final fight is between Dutch and Ranger on the airship. Ranger shoots Dutch with the revolver that Dutch stole from him in the first episode. Ranger deactivates the autopilot and sees the Brotherhood vertibirds on the horizon, which will eventually be the focus of season 2. Okay, that's about 3.5 pages of trying to summarize this. Now my thoughts. I like the general setup of New York. The outfits, the Blue Bloods, the overall airship port goal, that's all good. I think my gripe really comes down to personal preference. I don't particularly care for some of the silly elements getting such a large focus for things like the Vault 52 experiments, the Nuka Girl character being so prominent, the Gloragnak the librarian joke, who I assume is from the same vault, or the Shakespearean speaking librarians. I don't mind pop culture references, naturally, but I kind of want them to stay in the background, not be important focuses for characters themselves. But that's me, not everyone will agree with that. But again, I like the power struggle of the city. I think that's great, and an airship would be a huge boon for a gang trying to keep control of the city. Moving on, next is meemimees? I'm going with meemimees, who, at the time of writing this, hasn't fully watched the show and did not plan to return to it. Still, the plot would be a telling of the West Coast as we previously knew it, using the sources of the classic games, New Vegas, and the Fall of Bible. More to the point, they would set it on the West Coast for its bounty of information available and focus on the aftermath of New Vegas. Specifically, they would choose to either have a Mr. House or Yes Man victory, what happened to the NCR territories after their defeat in the Second Battle of Hoover Dam. The plot would feature internal political struggles and a weakening of central powers. It could also resemble the US, but harsher. Instead of the manifest destiny of succeeding, it failed and conquered territories and tribes decided to rebel. meemimees also notes that there's not a singular big bad faction. There will be a showcase of unique West Coast wildlife, such as rat scorpion, giant ants, and a deathclaw nest, or rather the damage caused by one, as well as small super mutant colonies of both peaceful and aggressive variety. That said, while the setup changes a bit, meemimees would also keep the cast with some alterations. Lucy would be an actual vault dweller, not one stepping outside a vault like she did in the show. There's a note that Lucy called Maximus a knight, but that's a bit up to interpretation on how she meant that, like potentially comparing Maximus to an actual medieval knight and not necessarily a Brotherhood one. Speaking of Maximus, he'd be edited to not be an idiot savant, Rather, he's accountable for his actions. He'd either be an outsider who only recently joined to secure his future, or be a full knight who's tired of seeing the West Coast BOS decline due to isolation and stubborn leadership. This could allow for that internal struggle we've seen across the games to materialize. Cooper will largely stay the same, but be just a ghoul and not focus much on Cooper Howard, the pre-war man. meemimees' reasoning is that in the time between pre- and post-war, and the rewriting of the show would be rather large, that the actor's life isn't very important. Still, he would lean into the knowledgeable wastelander, harsh teacher persona who is still struggling with going feral. Overall, the episode count will be 12 to 14, 45 minutes in length. First episode, bomb dropping, societal tensions, etc. Then each episode will introduce characters and their various stories, go into world building, characters revealing their perspective, and their understanding of the world, how the BOS reached out to communities and became less xenophobic, and the last couple of episodes will converge together in the aftermath of the protagonists' respective actions. Maybe there's an uprising in NCR territories, maybe friction between the BOS factions results in a major power plant getting captured by the NCR. So this isn't a bad premise. Essentially chooses to focus on the more overall political and social tensions of the West Coast. It tells a much more nuanced world building story. I feel that each episode dedicated to a single character's perspective would become rather tedious if it's retelling the same stories. I think the audience would get tired of the plot not moving forward for 2 to 3 episodes apiece. In addition, I wouldn't focus the entire first episode to the bombs dropping, because it sets up the pre-war fallout and not the post-war fallout. 10 or so minutes like in the actual show is much better. Also, there would need to be a central plot for the audience to focus on. Some MacGuffin, some goal the main characters take on. I do like the general idea of the show focusing more on the situations the locals face as the NCR is starting to fall. That's much more enjoyable than the overall narrative we wound up getting. Finally, Nate the Rake. So, Nate would keep most of what was written for the show, but does have some grievances from the lighting to the lore. Lighting, Nate never felt like the show was actually set in LA. And lore, there's elements that would definitely be changed. For one, a different NCR town much closer to Santa Monica in Vault 33 would be the one that was Newt rather than Shady Sands. Checkpoints and wall settlements keeping away the growing dregs as well. Lucy would have been given more scenes of growth and adaptation, as currently Nate feels like she gets the least amount while being the main protagonist of the three. Controversially, Cooper would be less of a badass, not bulletproof, and less edgy and charismatic. Pre-war fluff would be cut down and cut out Big Mountain in the Vault-Tec business meeting, as they're just a research company partnering with Sinclair, and make Mr. House more vocally against Vault-Tec and their obsessions. In addition, he'd have Cooper shoot Hank and flee to New Vegas, as it feels more sensible. Hank's Pip-Boy would be the only one to access the water system of Vault 33 and unlock in the cryopods that contain Cooper's daughter. In addition, the ending scene would show a thriving New Vegas rather than a ruinous one. Now my thoughts. From a lore perspective, I think I agree with most of this. Maybe even about Cooper being too badass, just reducing it a teeny tiny bit. But that sounds like an unpopular opinion. And I think the biggest thing I agree with is, of course, the city that was chosen to be nuked. Personally, I would have suggested Adatum, or rather New Adatum, as the city that got hit. It's not perfect, but it's a hell of a lot closer to Santa Monica than freaking Shady Sands was. But Adatum is kind of the Fallout 1 town people don't really think about when they think about the first Fallout. That's Shady Sands, Junktown, and the hub. Adatum is kind of the back burner town. And I think they wanted a town that caused a lot of shock and awe when it was heard. But maybe its lesser importance would have actually made it the perfect target. Recognizable, but not so important as to cause a lot of anger. Depends on the goal, I suspect. Anyway, that was 3 more of your ideas for the show. If you enjoyed this, let me know. And a special thanks to my channel members, especially my MerryMarvelMarcher members like that crazy game developer and Danny McVie. If you'd like to support me and join as well, I'd be more than happy. Otherwise, like, share, subscribe, all that typical YouTube stuff. Thank you. Have a good one.